Hello, and welcome to another Live with Andrew. We are doing the lesson 7 of our Live with Andrew math series, and we are going to be continuing fractions. I know that it's been a little while since we put a video on, and I apologize for that. There are some computer errors, and I had to get my computer worked on and some other things. So we're back. Glad you're with us, and I hope you're enjoying this. Please follow us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube as you're watching this. If you're not sure, just search Rankin County Adult Education and it'll be the easiest and quickest way to find where we are. As always, all of our Live with Andrew lessons are posted on YouTube, and we'll be posting other content, so be sure to click subscribe and keep up with that. Even as we get back into classes and seeing what we're doing, we will still be utilizing this YouTube channel. So please keep up with some of the stuff that you see on there. All the programs you had access to in class, you still have access. I know I'm getting emails from people occasionally saying that they've been kicked out and they don't have access anymore. If you don't access it for 60 days, it automatically kicks you out. So that's why you may be losing access. So just take a little bit, get in there and work. The more you do, the easier it'll be to pass the test when that time comes. Again, for more information, contact your teachers through Remind, or you can always email me at adult.education. Again, I'll put this slide on there several times today. If you have questions and you want extra help, go to Khan Academy. We have a class code. You can join in and just work on the different skills that you need in those areas, and that'll keep you getting the work that you need. We do have Smart Start class available. If you have any questions, please contact me if you're interested in that. We would love to get you in our Smart Start class and help you to be ahead of the curve when it comes to looking for jobs and seeking jobs in the future. Now, this is our second go back lesson to fill in the gaps that we had before. All right, we talked about some of the things. We started fractions in our previous lesson, and this is the second of the go back lessons for fractions, and to help people understand some of those skills that are there. And with fractions, you'll see here, it's a little review, a little bit of last week. I will not let you leave this house looking so improper, young lady. And with this, unless you came last week and you saw and you're familiar with improper fractions, that cartoon is not going to make much sense to you. But we are going to look at it, do a little bit of a review as we move forward into what we're doing this week. Now, basic operations, we talked about adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing in our first lesson. That same concept comes through into what we're talking about now. And fractions are one of those crucial concepts that you need to know as you're doing your math skills. Last week, we covered equivalent and improper fractions, as well as the first part of adding fractions. So now what? Now what are we going to look at? Well, we're going to just keep building and kind of building that snowball and adding more and more information to what we're working on in fractions. Here's a quick rules for fractions. It goes back, and this is rules for adding fractions, so rules for addition. We talked about this last week, and there were several slides, but I concisely put it all together. If you're watching this on YouTube and you want to just pause it for a second so you can write all these down, that's a good way to do it. Have you a little notebook of definitions and rules. The first is it must have a common denominator. To add fractions, you've got to have a common denominator. If you don't have a common denominator, you won't be able to get the correct answer. So you got to do that first. Then you just add the fractions, you add the whole numbers, and you reduce if necessary. All right, so that's the rules for addition there. Now we're going to see this, and I'm going to do a quick little review for you so you can see it. If you haven't done our previous lesson and you feel that you really need to work on more fractions and not just starting where we are now, go back and watch last week's lesson. It was the lesson 6 of the series. But here we have 1/4 plus 1/3. Again, it has to have a common denominator. So to find the common denominator, we're going to multiply the top one by 3/3 and the bottom one by 4/4. And that gives us the equivalent fractions there of 3/12 and 4/12. Then we add the top numbers. 3 plus 4 is 7/12. So that's how you add the fraction. And again, if you are doing this at home and you're working on it, just If you needed to pause to do the lessons, we're about to do another, or to do the problem, here's another one you can do. Just hit pause when you're ready to come back and talk to us. Come back and talk to us. But on this next one, again, it needs a common denominator. So what are we going to do? We're going to look at it and see, okay, 3 over 3 and 8 over 8 will give us the common denominator of 24. And that's going to be 3 times 3 is 9 24ths, and 2 times 8 is 16 24ths. Then we add those together, and we get 25 24ths. Now, this takes us back to the cartoon that we talked about just a second ago. We have an improper fraction here. The top number is bigger than the bottom number. So what do we have to do? We need to look and figure out how to take this improper fraction and get it into a number, a mixed number that'll allow us to find the answer that we're looking for here. So what we're going to do on improper fraction, and again, trying to make sure we're being precise with our language and doing what we need to do, the numerator, which is the top number, is larger than the denominator. So that's what an improper fraction is. And we want to make sure that we know that numerator is the top number, denominator is the bottom number. I'll mention that again in a little bit, and you just want to make sure that you're familiar with that terminology, because that'll help you keep from making mistakes as we move on. How can you turn a mixed number into, or an improper fraction into a mixed number? You're going to divide the denominator into the numerator. So 24 goes into 25 one time, and then there is 1 left over, because 24, you subtract it from 25, it leaves you with 1 out of 24. All right, so that's the way you convert that. Now, here's some fractions. Again, this is from last week, so if you were here with us last week, you have seen this, but just want to make sure that you are familiar with it as we move forward. Again, if you're working on YouTube, just hit pause and you can work these, and then we'll go over them. I'm going to do it quickly since this is a review from last week. We get 6 over 6, 5 over 5, and that gives us the fraction of 24 30ths and 25 30ths. We add those together, that gives us 49 30ths, which reduces down to 1 and 19 30ths. And then 5 over 12 plus 7 over 8, or 5 twelfths plus 7 eighths, it's 2 over 2, 3 over 3. We get the equivalent fractions there of 10 24ths, 21 24ths, and that gives us the answer of 31 24ths, which would be 1 and 7 24ths. All right, so that's the answer to that fraction. Okay, now, as we've done this and we're adding mixed numbers, this is where this is new for us. It's not the same thing that we did last time. This is where we're kind of changing it up a little bit for you. And as we look at it, the rules are still the same. You're going to have a common denominator, and we know that. We know we're going to need the common denominator there. So we look at it and, wow, we already have a common denominator. So we're good on that one. All right. We just add the top numbers. 4 and 3 makes 7 over 5. And then we add the whole numbers. 3 and 2 makes 5. Now, as you see there, I have the arrow that moves over and it says 1 and 2/5. Well, what's 1 and 2/5? Well, 1 and 2/5 is what that 7/5 is. That's an improper fraction that we have there with the whole number. So we have to find out how much that actually makes it. So that's 1 and 2/5, which we're going to add to the 5. We add that to the 5, and that's going to give us 6, because 1 and 5 is 6, and then the 2/5 just carries over. So to add mixed numbers in addition with fractions, it's not any harder. It's not any different. You just have to make sure they have a common denominator, then add the fraction, add the whole number, and if it's improper, make sure you add whatever the improper fraction is to the whole number at the end. All right. So if you want to work this one, hit pause, work it out, see what answer you get, and then we'll go over it. So as you do it, we see we're going to have to find a common denominator here. We have 3 and 5, so what do we need to do? We're going to multiply the top one by 5 over 5 and the bottom one by 3 over 3. When we do that, we're going to equal with the equivalent fraction of 15/5 at the top, and at the bottom, it's going to be 6/15. Once we do that, you can bring your whole numbers over. Some people leave them on the left side, way over there. Some people move them over. I like to move them over. It just helps me to kind of keep everything straight without getting things out of place. But it's kind of each to your own on that one. Once we're here, we're going to add the top numbers. 5 and 6 is 11/15, and then 4 plus 3 is 7/15, and that one is reduced to its lowest term. Now, that is adding with mixed numbers, and with subtracting fractions, it's just like adding. All right, so that's a good thing to know. We've already done the addition, so to subtract, here's what we're going to do. I gave you the rules again, just so you can be familiar with all this as we get started. But what the rules are here is you're going to have a common denominator. That's the same. Subtract the fractions. The last one, it was add the fractions. The only difference here, it says borrowing if needed. In subtraction, sometimes you have to borrow. It's not just going to be your same number. You might have to borrow something. If you don't have the whole amount there, you might have to borrow a small portion. So that's going to be a little bit different. Then you're going to subtract the whole numbers and reduce if necessary. So those are your rules. Again, if you have these somewhere, you can write them down. That way you can make sure that you're doing all the skills that you need to do there. All right. So now we have that. Let's look at a couple. We have 5/7 minus 4/7. Okay. So 5/7 minus 4/7. So what are we going to do on this one? We're going to have a common denominator, so we're good. To subtract this, we just subtract the bottom number from the top number. 5 minus 4 is 1, and then bring the 7 down. So 1/7. Pretty simple. It's just common denominator, you're good to go. On the next one there, 3/4 minus 1/4. If we have 3/4 and we take away 1/4, then we're left with 2/4. That one can reduce. 2/4 is the same as 1/2. We divide them both by 2, and that gives us 1/2. So we just reduced there. Again, if you need more practice on that, see the previous lessons, as well as go to Khan Academy. You can get all the practice you need in that. So let's look at another one. Improper, or it's not an improper fraction, it's just not common denominators. They're different. We have 2/3 minus 1/6. So what are we going to do with this one? We are going to find a common denominator, which 2/3, 1/6, we know the common denominator can be 6. So it's going to be 2/2 and 1/1. And you may say, well, why are you putting 1/1? Why don't you just bring 1/6 over? A lot of times what people do is they do the top one, then they go to the bottom one, and they end up saying, oh, I got to multiply it times 2 because I multiplied the other one by 2. If you're good and you can remember that, that's great. I like to keep it the same way every time. That way I'm not having to learn how to do something different. I'm doing the exact same problem every single time that I work on a problem. I want to keep that same pattern through everything that I do. So now I have 4/6 over 1/6. I subtract the 1 from the 4 and I get 3/6. And again, it reduces to 1/2, just like the previous problem. All right, so let's try one more of those. And you can pause it, give yourself some time to work it out, and we can look at it and see what we have here. All right, so 7/9 minus 1/3. I find my common denominator. Some people may look at this and say, oh, my common denominator needs to be 27. It could be 18, but it also could be 9. So again, I have 1/1 times 3/3, and that gives us the equivalent fractions there of 7/9 and 3/9. What's 7 minus 3? That gives us 4/9, and it is reduced to the lowest common denominator. All right, again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Please don't hesitate to get on Khan Academy and do some work on there. Get in there and see what you can find and do a little bit of extra. That'll help you to really get it good. And that's what we want to do, is be able to do this backwards and forwards. Now let's look with this in the mixed numbers. All right, we're going to subtract these mixed numbers, and we're going to see what the answer would be. Again, to be a common denominator, you have to start with that part. You got to get that common denominator before we can subtract. So we have 2/3 and 2/5, and what we're going to do, we know, okay, it's going to be 15. So what times each of those gives us that? 5/5 and 3/3. Now, as I do this, I'm finding the common denominator, and I see that 2 times 5 is 10/15, and then 2 times 3 is 6/15. Once I get to here, I can bring my whole numbers over because that's how I like to do it. And I'm going to subtract 6 from 10, which gives me 4/15. And then I'm going to subtract 4 and 3, which gives me 1. So my answer to that one would be 1 and 4/15. All right. Now, on this, I'm going to do this way every time. And again, you say, okay, that was pretty simple. We figured that out. But I try to do my problems the exact same way every single time. So I'm learning the process, and then I can plug any number in and be able to figure it out. All right, so now we look at this one. And forgive my animation there. I already have it started. We have here 5 minus 2.5. Now, if you kind of overlook where it says times 1/1, if we were going to subtract this, what is the rule of subtracting fractions? You have to have a common denominator, right? But the 5 doesn't even have a fraction, so there's not a common denominator. So what do we need to do for that? Well, we need to make it have a denominator. So what we're going to do is borrow from the 5, just like you would do in subtraction if you have a 0 and you have to go to the next number and borrow. So I borrow from the 5, which is going to make it a 4. But then I have to borrow that 1 and show it with a common denominator. So I just use 2/2, because if I have 2/2, that equals 1, and I borrowed one number. It was 5, and I borrowed 1, which gives me the 4. And so I have 4 plus 1, which is what gives me 5 there. And that gives me the 2/2 and the 1/2. So I just brought the half over. And then I bring over the 4, and I bring over the 2. So the 2.5 stays the same. But if you look at that top one, what would 4 plus 2/2 be? Because it's not an improper fraction, but it's just any number over itself equals 1. So at the top, it still equals 5. I didn't change what it is. I just changed what it is, what that looks like. The same way if you go to the store and you ask for change, they give you, like, if you get change for a 20, and maybe you're at the arcade or you're playing games and you need a bunch of quarters, or at the laundromat, you give them a $20 bill and they give you $20 worth of quarters. They're not changing how much money you have. They're changing what your money looks like. And that's what we're doing here. We're not changing what the 5 is, how much 5 is. We're changing what that 5 looks like. So here we have 4 over 2/2, and then we subtract the half, the 2.5 from it, and that leaves us with the final answer of half. And then what's 4 minus 2? 2.5. All right, so that lets you see that process, and it lets you see what you're doing there, so you know how to better answer that problem. All right, so here's another one you can work on. Same thing. We have 9 minus 4 and 2/5. All right, so take a couple seconds to work that out and press play when you're ready to resume. So as we see this one, we know our denominator is 5. So that's what I'm going to make my number be. I'm going to make it be 5/5. So I borrow from the 9. It's going to be 5/5. So then I make it be 8 and 5/5, and I make it be 4 and 2/5. Once I've done that, I can subtract 2 from 5, which gives me 3. And then I subtract 8 from 4, or 4 from 8, I'm sorry, and that gives me 4 and 3/5. So you see my process, you see what I've done, and where I've gone through. Now on this next problem, you can pause it, give yourself some time to work, but you may realize, wait a second, I have 1/4 on the top and 3/4 on the bottom. I can't take 3 from 1. Some people, and if you started working this and you got messed up, and you might have got 2/4. Some people look at this and they just look at the two numbers and say, oh, 1 and 3. The difference of that's 2, and they go ahead and put that. But you can't do it that way, because you can't take 3/4 from 1/4. You have to make sure that you have the proper number there. So we're going to use the same process that we just used when we had a whole number with no fraction. We're going to have to borrow and add a 1 in fraction form to the fraction that we already have there. So what we're going to do, we're going to borrow from the 7, and we're going to add the denominator, 4/4. And whatever the denominator is, because these already have a common denominator, I know I'm going to be working with 4, so I'll be good on that. We'll look at changing the denominator on the next problem. But once I do this, I'm just going to add those fractions at the top. 1 plus 4 gives me 5/4. And then at the bottom, I have 3 3/4. I'm going to just multiply it over, bring all that over to be 6 5/4 and 3 3/4. So as you can see on the top line there, what did I do? I just brought the 1/4 over, added it to 4/4. That gave me 5/4. I brought the 6 over because we borrowed 1 from it. And again, if you look at that mixed number, what would that be if we reduced it? We would reduce that 5/4. We know it goes in there one time, which would make it 7 1/4. So we still have the exact same problem there. We just have it looking in a slight way, okay? A slight different way there. When we subtract, 5 minus 3 is 4. Or 5 minus 3 gives us 2, and then we bring the 4 down, and that gives us 2/4, and then we have 6 minus 3, which gives us 3, and then we look across there, and what do we have? That reduces to half. We can bring the 3 over, and that's our final answer on that one. All right, on this next one, we don't have common denominators here, so that's going to be your first step. If you'll take a couple seconds to work this out, and then you can press play when you're ready to resume. All right, you've had time to work that one out, and what we're going to have to do first is get the common denominator. So to do the common denominator, we see 6 and 4. We could multiply those and get 24, but 6 times 2 gives us 12, and 4 times 3 gives us 12. So that's what I went with. That was our lowest common denominator there. So 2/2 gives us, it's the same as 1, so we get that common denominator first. You may look at it and go, well, I need to borrow first because that's smaller. Well, you don't necessarily know that until you get the common denominator. So don't borrow until you get common denominators. Then you're all working in the same thing. You can borrow ahead of time. It just makes more work for you later. So it's just a little bit easier to do it this way. We're going to, again, follow the same pattern every single time. The first thing we have to do is get a common denominator. Then we can borrow after that. So as we look at this, we get it and we see that's going to be 2/12. And then on the bottom, that's going to be 9/12. And I bring over my 6 and I bring over my 3. And now we see, yes, I do need to borrow. So we're going to borrow from the 6 and make it a 5. We're going to add that 12 to the top, which gives us 14/12. And then we're going to have the 5 and 14/12. And then on the bottom, we're going to have 3 and 9/12. We just brought the whole thing over. So you subtract 9 from 14, that gives you 5/12. And then 5 minus 3 would give you 2/12. So it's going to be 2 and 5/12 is your final answer there. Again, we're following the same pattern. That's why I love math, especially because it's the same thing every time. Every time I can keep doing those same things. Now we're going to subtract these numbers. You look at this one. Again, it's not common denominator, so you're going to have to do that. Hit pause, press play when you're ready to see the answer. As you look at it now, we know that the common denominator is going to need to be 15. So I go through and I make the common denominator 15. That's going to be 10/15 and 12/15. And then I bring over my 3 and 2. As I'm working through it, now I know I need to borrow, so I borrow from the 3, I make it a 2, and I add 15 to the 10, and that's going to give me 2 and 25/15 minus 2 and 12/15. Once I do the math here, that's going to give me 13/15, and then 2 minus 2, whoops, 2 minus 2 is 0. So it just goes away. And I did that one deliberately that would make it disappear, because sometimes people go, well, wait, I need something to put here. Well, no, if you have 2 and you take away 2, then it's 0. You don't have to put anything there. So the answer to that one would just be 13/15. Now, that's subtraction. And by far, the hardest part of operations of fractions. Adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. What you just went through was the hardest. If you need extra practice on it, like I always say, go to Khan Academy, put in adding, subtracting fractions. I can't emphasize how important that is. Like, it's just easy to be able to do that kind of stuff on there. So that's a good way to get that practice. Now for multiplication, super easy, easier than adding, easier than subtracting. It is not hard at all. It's my breeze one. So easy peasy, lemon squeezy, whatever you want to call it. Here's what it is. First, we have the rules. Must be fractions. That's the first rule. Must be fractions. You may go, well, idiot, you're teaching fractions. Of course it's fractions. Wait just a second and we'll talk about that. The second rule, multiply straight across. Numerators times numerators, denominators times denominators. All right, we just multiply straight across. And then 3, reduce if necessary. Sometimes you'll have to reduce, sometimes you don't. It just kind of depends on how the numbers fall. So that first rule, must be a fraction. On here, I have 6 different terms. Which of these, just pause it for a second and see which of those are considered fractions and which of those are not. You may look at it and go, well, they're all fractions except the 7, right? Not exactly. If we look at it, the first one, 2/3, it gets a gold star. That's a fraction. The second one, 2/2. Yes, that equals 1, but it's still a fraction because it has a numerator and a denominator. And then 13/1, that's a fraction at the bottom because it has a numerator and a denominator. Now you may be saying, well, wait a second, so does 5 4/6 and so does 9 1/3. Yes, they do have a fraction, but what did we call those earlier? We called those mixed numbers. 7, that's a whole number. 9 1/3, that's a mixed number. And 5 4/6, that is a mixed number. All 3 of those are not fractions. So to multiply fractions, it must be a fraction. So it's got to be a fraction. Now, can it be improper? Yes, 13/1 is an improper fraction. It just can't be a mixed number or a whole number. All right, so how can we convert those numbers? And I just put them on here in their own little spot. How do we convert those to a fraction? Well, you can pause it, convert those real quick. We've worked on that, converting them to improper fractions. Take a couple seconds to see the answer now. It's just 7/1. That's a fraction. We multiply 3 times 9 is 27 plus 1 gives us 28/3. That's the improper fraction. And then 6 times 5 is 30 plus 4 is 34/6. That is the improper fraction. So if you see fractions, you're good. If you see improper fractions, you're good. If you're trying to multiply mixed numbers, you're going to have to convert them to an improper fraction first because you have to be a fraction to multiply. So if we look at this problem, we have 2/3 times 5/8. All right. Are they fractions? Yes, both of those are fractions. So we're good to go. So what are we going to do on this one? Multiply numerators times numerators, denominator times denominator. Numerator times numerator gives us 10. Denominator times denominator gives us 24th. Once we get there, my last step is to reduce. What goes into 10 and 24? And I kind of put a reminder here. I've been just putting the reduced answer on there, but I decided, okay, let me put in a little bit of a dividing sign and a number. This is what we're doing when we're reducing, if you forgot this. Again, first lesson, go back to the fraction lesson and you can see a little bit more about this, but I'm dividing each of these by 2. 2 goes into 10 5 times, 2 goes into 24 12 times, and that's how you reduce that down to the lowest form. Here's another one for you. They're mixed numbers now. You can pause it, work it out, and then hit play when you're ready to resume. So to work this one out, what do we got to do? First, we've got to make sure they're fractions because I can't do anything until they're a fraction. So I say 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 is 7/2. 3 times 1 is 3 plus 2 is 5/3. Now I have fractions. I multiply numerators and denominators. 5 times 7 is 35. 2 times 3 is 6. How many times will 6 go into 35? It goes 5 times with 5 left over out of 6. That's it. Now, division is practically multiplication, but it has Kentucky Fried Chicken with it. Not exactly Kentucky Fried Chicken, but it's my way of remembering this. Just remember KFC when you're dividing fractions. KFC, KFC, KFC. All right, so here's your rules for division. 1, it must be fractions. Again, just like multiplication, must be fractions, right? Second, you've got to KFC. Keep, flip, change. You're going to keep the first fraction. You're going to flip the second fraction, and you're going to change divide to multiply. Now, since we've changed divide to multiply, so guess what it is now? It's just a multiplication problem. So all we're going to do now is multiply straight across. Numerators and denominators, and then we reduce. So dividing fractions is just like multiplication with the exception of KFC. And hopefully you can remember the dancing KFC chicken bucket. So when you're dividing fractions, you're going to think KFC. You may get hungry for chicken, but who doesn't love some chicken? All right, so let's look at a couple of these. We're ready to divide. I put the same one as we had for multiplication a second ago. 2/3, but I changed it to divided by 5/8. All right, so are they fractions? Yes, we know it's fractions. So what am I going to do? I'm going to keep the first one. I just bring it straight down. 2/3, I bring down 2/3. All right, so K is the first one. F's the second one. I'm going to flip the second one. Instead of 5/8, it's going to be 8/5. I just flip it. KF, keep, flip, and then in the last one, I'm going to C. I'm going to change that division sign to a multiplication sign. Now that I've done that, I'll multiply straight across. 2 times 8 is 16. 3 times 5 is 15. Once I get that, I can reduce. 15 goes into 16 one time with 1 left over out of 15. It's that simple. KFC. All right, here's the next one. Again, pause it if you need to work it out. And when you're ready to resume, just press play to see the answer. So on this one, it's got to be fractions. These are mixed numbers. So what do I need to do first? Change 4 and 2. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9/4. So I keep the first fraction. I just bring it straight down. And then I'm going to flip the second one. Now on this one, I made a mistake. Let me fix it real quick. Hold on one second. All right, so we have the first one. We keep the first one, 9/4, and then we're going to flip the second one. Now, 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7 halves. So it's 7 halves, but I flip it to 2/7. So 7/2, I flip it. That's the F, is flip. And then I'm going to change divide to multiply, and that gives me 9 times 2, which is 18, and 4 times 7, which is 28, and that will reduce, divide each of them by 2, and that gives you 9/14. So you keep the first one, you flip the second one, and then you change the sign. All right. Now, that is multiplying and dividing fractions. If you need more help, again, Khan Academy, I can't emphasize how important it is to be able to do some of that work on there. We have our class code, join. If you have any questions, please contact us. Hope to see you next time with more information on our YouTube math series that we have. If you have other options or other subjects you want to look at, send me an email or send a message through Facebook or comment on the videos, and I will put something together for it. Again, thank you for participating. If you have questions, you can put all that stuff in there, and stay safe. Hope you're good. Have a great, great day.